Alice had always loved the quiet of the small village where she grew up. Lost among the dense forests, the village seemed the perfect place to forget the hustle and bustle of the city. But in recent weeks, the peace had disappeared. First, a young girl returning home late at night disappeared. Then a hunter who went into the woods and never returned. People whispered about wolves, but there was uncertainty mixed with real fear in those conversations. Alice didn't believe the rumors. She worked at the local library and always found an explanation for any mysteries. But one night she noticed something strange. Her window overlooked the hill where the old church stood. In the light of the full moon, she saw a figure standing at the entrance to the church. The figure didn't move, but its gaze seemed to be directed directly at Alice's house. The next morning, Alice went to the church. It hadn't been used in a long time. The doors were boarded up and the windows were covered in dust. But as she got closer, she noticed that one of the boards was broken, and footprints on the ground led inside. It was dark and cold inside. A faint ray of light shone through the broken window, illuminating the old altar. Alice smelled a strange odor, a mixture of iron and something sweetish. She stepped closer and froze. A dead bird lay on the altar, its wings spread and blood oozing from its chest. Someone had drawn symbols on the wall behind the altar. They were written in something red and looked like ancient runes. Alice couldn't look away until she heard a faint rustle behind her. She turned around, but there was no one in the church. When Alice left the church, the sun was already setting. Returning home, she met a stranger, a tall man in a long black coat, with a pale face and deep dark eyes, stood by the roadside. "You must be Alice," he said, smiling slightly. "Do we know each other?" she asked, feeling her heart clench. "Not yet," he answered, "but we will meet again soon. Don't go to that church again. It's no place for you." Alice wanted to ask who he was, but the man had already disappeared, as if he had vanished into the fading dusk. Back home, Alice decided to find out what the symbols she had seen in the church meant. She flipped through old books in the library and found mention of an ancient cult associated with the worship of the blood moon. This cult believed that blood shed under the light of the moon could grant immortality. The more she read, the more she felt she was being watched. When Alice looked up, she saw a shadow in the window. For a moment she thought it was the same stranger. That night she could not sleep again. The moon, full and bright, shone directly into her room. Just then she heard a faint knocking at the window. She went over and saw a face, pale, with burning eyes. It was looking right at her. "You chose the wrong time to seek the truth," the voice whispered. And at that moment, the light of the moon grew brighter and the shadow disappeared. Alice knew that now she was part of something bigger than she had ever imagined. Alice awoke to a strange sensation, as if someone was watching her. Her bedroom was plunged into semi-darkness, and the full moon was still shining outside. The nightly knocking at the window kept her awake. She couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a dream. The next day, a stranger came to the library where Alice worked. It was the same man she had met by the roadside. He looked less intimidating now, but he still retained an aura of mystery. "We need to talk," he said, giving her no time for questions. "My name is Mikhail. I know what you saw in the church." Alice froze. Her heart clenched, but she nodded, inviting him to sit down. "This place is an ancient hearth of darkness," he began. "Your village is built on land where rituals associated with the blood moon have been performed for centuries. These symbols you have seen belong to an old cult, and they are connected to creatures that feed on life." "You mean, vampires?" Alice asked incredulously. Mikhail nodded. "They are real, and someone is trying to awaken their power again." Mikhail suggested that Alice go back to the church to find more clues. He warned that it was dangerous, but she insisted on going. When they entered the old building, Mikhail pointed to the altar. "There must be a hidden passage here. Places like this always have hideouts." After a long search, they found a secret door hidden behind a wooden panel. It led into an underground tunnel. The air inside was musty, the walls were covered with cobwebs, and the floor was stained with something dark. "It's blood," Mikhail said quietly, examining the stains, "and fresh." Alice felt a chill run down her spine. The tunnel led them into a large underground room, lit by a strange red light. A circle of ancient runes was laid out on the floor, and in the center lay a bowl of thick, dark liquid. "This place was used for rituals," Mikhail said. "They are trying to awaken someone or something." At that moment they heard footsteps. A tall woman with pale skin and long black hair entered the room. Her eyes glowed with a red light. "How nice of you to come," she said. her voice cold and mesmerizing. "You're just in time." Mikhail instantly pulled out a silver dagger from under his coat. "Alice, go away." But the woman only grinned. "She's already a part of this, don't you see?" Alice felt something hot encompass her arm. She looked down and saw that a symbol like the ones in the church had appeared on her skin. "What is it?" she whispered. "You are chosen," the woman replied. "The blood of the moon flows in you." Mikhail lunged at the woman, but she was moving too fast. Her movements were almost inhuman. She tossed him aside as if he weighed nothing. "You can't stop me," she hissed, coming toward Alice. But at that moment, the symbol on Alice's hand began to glow. She felt a strange energy spilling over her body. The woman stopped, her face contorted in surprise. "Impossible," she whispered. Alice didn't realize what was happening, but intuitively raised her hand. A bright light burst out of her palm, blinding the woman. She screamed and disappeared, leaving behind only a cloud of black smoke. Mikhail stood up, holding his side. His face was a mixture of pain and surprise. "You're one of them," he said, looking at Alice. "What?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Your blood is bound to this land, to this cult, but you have the power to stop them." Alyssa didn't know what to answer. Her life had changed forever, and now she was embroiled in a battle she didn't realize she was in. But she knew one thing: she would not let the darkness win. After Alice discovered a strange power within herself, her life changed. She now knew she was connected to an ancient cult that had worshipped the blood moon for centuries. Michael explained that her blood probably carried something special, the power to resist darkness. But with it came a realization: the darkness she had defeated in the dungeon was only the beginning. That night, Alice couldn't sleep again. Her arm, where the symbol had appeared, was throbbing as if it had been burned. She was sitting by the window looking at the moon when suddenly she heard a whisper. "You belong to us." She turned around, but there was no one in the room. At that moment, the symbol on her hand glowed and visions flashed before Alice's eyes. She saw an ancient ritual. People in dark cloaks stood around an altar, and in the center lay a girl. Her blood flowed into a bowl that glowed with a red light. "This is what they want you to do," Mikhail said, appearing behind her back. Alice flinched. "How did you end up here?" "I can sense when their magic is activated," he explained. "You saw their target. They want to use your blood to complete the ritual and awaken the ancient evil." Mikhail suggested that Alice go to one of the places associated with the cult. It was an old manor house located on the edge of the forest. According to him, records of the cult were kept there, which could help them understand how to stop the ritual. By the time they reached the manor, night had already descended on the village. The moon shone brightly, illuminating the ruined walls and overgrown garden. "Be careful," Mikhail warned. "They could be here." Inside the manor house, the air was heavy. On the walls hung ancient paintings depicting scenes of rituals. Alice could feel her symbol pulsing, as if reacting to the magic that still lingered in the place. They found an old library, where Mikhail started looking for records. Alice, meanwhile, noticed a book that lay apart from the others. It was bound in black leather, and on its cover was engraved the same symbol that glowed on her hand. When Alice opened the book, the pages seemed to come alive. Visions flashed before her eyes again. She saw the face of the woman with the burning eyes, the same woman they had met in the dungeon. "She's calling you," a voice whispered. At that moment, the library doors slammed shut, and the air was filled with cold. Mikhail pulled out his silver dagger, but even he looked worried. "They knew we were coming," he said. Figures began to emerge from the shadows. They were cult servants, men with pale skin and empty eyes. They moved slowly, but their numbers were growing by the second. "We have to get out of here," Mikhail said. Alice felt the symbol on her hand begin to glow again. She raised her hand, and a bright beam of light erupted from it, pushing away the nearest servants. "How do you do that?" Mikhail asked, looking at her in surprise. "I don't know," Alice answered. "It just happens." They managed to escape from the manor, but now Alice knew that her power was not just an accident. Mikhail had told her that the blood in her veins probably belonged to the descendants of an ancient family that had tried to resist the cult once before. "You are the key to their defeat," he said, "but you can also be their weapon if they get their hands on you." Alice realized that time was short. The cult was preparing for a ritual that would take place on the next night of the blood moon. "We must find a way to destroy them once and for all," she said. Mikhail nodded. "The book you found might have the answer." Alice opened the book again. In the last pages, she found a description of a ritual that could destroy the cult, but it required a sacrifice. They want your blood to complete their ritual, Mikhail said, but if we use it otherwise, we could destroy their power. Does that mean I have to die? Alice asked, her voice trembling. Mikhail didn't answer right away. I won't let them take you, he said finally. We'll find another way. But Alice already knew that there might not be another way. The night of the blood moon was approaching, and the tension was growing by the hour. Alice and Michael were carefully preparing for the decisive clash. The book Alice had found stated that the ritual could be interrupted if the blood of the chosen one was used to destroy the symbols of the cult, but that required incredible strength and could cost her her life. Mikhail pulled ancient artifacts from his stash that could aid in the battle. Among them were silver daggers, protective amulets, and vials of consecrated water. If they start the ritual, we'll need to act quickly, he said. You must stay in the center of the circle and stay close to the book. Alice nodded, but fear grew in her heart. She knew her blood was the key to victory, but she didn't know if she could survive the ritual. Are you sure you want to do this? Mikhail asked, looking into her eyes. I have no choice, Alice answered. If I don't stop them, they will destroy everyone. As the moon rose, its light colored everything around them an ominous shade of red. Alice and Michael went to the ruins of the old church, where, as they had learned from the book, the ritual was to take place. Inside the church, members of the cult were already gathered. Their figures were hidden under dark cloaks, and a fire burned in the center of the altar. Around it stood vessels filled with blood. The head priestess, the same woman with the burning eyes, stood in front of the altar. Her voice echoed throughout the hall. Today, our power will become absolute. The blood of the moon will grant us eternal life. When Alice and Mikhail entered, the priestess looked directly at them. You have come after all, she said, turning to Alice, just as predicted. The cult servants rushed at Mikhail, but he was ready. His silver dagger flashed through the air, slashing at his enemies. Alice, on the other hand, headed for the altar, feeling the symbol on her hand pulsing ever stronger. Do you think you can stop me? The priestess asked, her voice full of contempt. I will not allow you to complete the ritual, Alice replied, picking up the book. The priestess laughed. Your blood belongs to us. You know that yourself. Alice felt her body fill with heat. The symbol on her hand glowed brighter than ever. If my blood can stop you, I will, she said. Alice stood in the center of the circle drawn on the floor and opened the book. The words of the ancient spell fell from her lips. Energy began to rise around her. A bright light filled the church. The priestess screamed, No, you dare not. But it was too late. The symbols of the cult began to crack and burn. One by one, the cult members fell to the ground, their bodies turning to ash. Alice could feel the power leaving her body. Her blood dripped to the ground, soaking into the circle, and the light grew brighter with each passing moment. You shouldn't have interfered, the priestess whispered before her figure disappeared into the flames. When it was over, Alice fell to her knees. Mikhail ran up to her, catching her before she hit the ground. You did it, he said. You destroyed their power. Alice smiled weakly. Is this the end? Mikhail looked at her and shook his head. This is only the beginning. You've changed the balance. Now the other powers will find out about you. Alice survived, but her life would never be the same again. The symbol on her hand remained as a reminder of what she had done. She knew there was a new battle ahead of her, but now she was ready. Blood in the moonlight had bound her to the ancient world, and there was no turning back. With the destruction of the ritual and the death of the cult, Alice had hoped it would be over, but with each passing day, she felt that the symbol on her arm was more than just a scar. It pulsed like a living thing, and visions began to appear in her dreams. Strange lands bathed in the bloody light of the moon, voices calling her name, and figures hidden in the shadows. Mikhail did not leave her alone. He realized that the consequences of the battle with the cult might show up later. You've ruined their plans, but that doesn't mean the threat is gone, he said one night. Such forces don't die completely. Alice couldn't disagree with him. She felt that the darkness she had destroyed had left something more behind. One morning, Alice found a strange envelope under her door. Inside was an old photograph where she saw a house. It was an unfamiliar place, but on the back was an inscription. It's where it all began. There you will find answers. Mikhail scrutinized the photograph. This is Ravenhall Manor, he said. It is far away from here, in the mountains. They say it's a place associated with ancient rituals. Alice knew she had to go there. "If it will help me understand who I am and what power is in me, I will go," she said. Mikhail didn't discourage her. "Then I will go with you." The journey took several days. Ravenhall Manor was huge but abandoned. The windows were broken, the walls were covered with moss, and there was a dense forest that made it feel isolated. Inside the manor, it looked as if time had stopped. Portraits of people with pale faces and cold eyes hung on the walls. There was a faint smell of mold and something metallic in the air. In one of the rooms, Alice found a diary. It belonged to a woman named Clara Ravenhall, the last mistress of the house. "The moon demands blood, but what if we could use her power for protection instead of destruction?" Alice realized that Clara was trying to find a way to control the power of the blood moon, but her notes cut off midway through. As night descended on the manor, Alice sensed that something was wrong. The symbol on her hand began to glow and the air felt heavy. "We are not alone here," Mikhail said, clutching the dagger. Shadows began to appear in the corridors. They moved quickly, almost silently, and surrounded Alice and Mikhail. "You woke us up," came a whisper. "You are our blood." Alice felt the same power awaken inside her that she had used in the church. She raised her hand, and light burst from the symbol, pushing away the shadows. "They want you," Mikhail said. "They know who you are." In the main hall of the manor, Alice found an altar similar to the one in the church. On it lay a book, but unlike the one she had found earlier, this one was intact. When Alice opened it, visions flashed before her. She saw Clara Ravenhall standing in front of a crowd of people, trying to stop the ritual, but instead, her power was out of control, and she herself became the source of the darkness. "You are her heir," came a voice. The figure of a woman appeared in front of Alice. It was Clara, but her eyes were empty and her skin as pale as a ghost's. "You can either complete what I started or you can become what I have become," she said. "How can I complete it?" Alice asked. Clara pointed to the book. "You must absorb their power. You must become their end." Alice realized what that meant. She must use her blood to seal the power of the blood moon forever, but that meant she would never be an ordinary human again. Mikhail tried to talk her out of it. "You don't have to do this. We'll find another way." But Alice knew there was no other way. She stood in front of the altar, opened the book and began to read the spell. The symbol on her hand glowed so brightly that the room was filled with blinding light. The shadows began to scream and disappear. One by one, Clara stood nearby, her face a mixture of pain and relief. "You freed us," she said before her figure disappeared. When it was over, Alice fell to her knees. The symbol on her hand no longer glowed, but she felt that her connection to the blood moon remained. At dawn, Alice and Michael left the manor. She now knew who she was and what role she was to play. "It's not over," she said, "but I'm ready." Mikhail smiled. "You are stronger than you think." Alice was now the guardian of a power that could destroy the world. Her blood was the key, but now she knew how to use it for good.